Hello dear friends, you are on the Ruslan Bailov channel. Well, the battles continue, and we continue to study the situation at the front. Friends, a small request before we continue. If you enjoyed this video, please support the channel by subscribing, giving a like, and writing in the comments where you are watching us from and what you think about what was described. And now let's continue. So friends, September begins for us, and it begins with rather good news. Russian fighters managed to make a huge and very significant breakthrough in the Zaporizhzhia region. This is an American schematic map, and the section highlighted in red is the territory that came under Russian control in this area over the past 24 hours. To give you a sense of scale for this breakthrough, or rather the section that came under Russian control, the depth of the advance here is more than 4 kilometers, while the width is more than 11 kilometers. This entire section covers an area of 36 square kilometers, even more than 36 square kilometers. Again, for understanding, that is more than Russian forces had taken in the Zaporizhzhia region over the past 3 months. Meaning, in the past 3 months, Russian forces took less than what they did here in just one day. The attack was powerful, carried out by a large column. So what do we have as a result of this attack? We have a serious improvement of Russian positions and, conversely, a serious worsening of the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine near the town of Orikhiv. Thanks to the Russian breakthrough with the column, current positions are now on the very outskirts of Novodanilivka, just 600 meters from the village. And Novodanilivka, we should understand, is essentially a suburb of Orikhiv, since the distance between the northern edge of the village and the southern edge of the city is less than 1 kilometer. About 700 meters. So this breakthrough is extremely important, not only because of its fantastic numbers for the Zaporizhzhia region, but also because of its significance. Orikhiv is one of the central immediate objectives in the Zaporizhzhia region. Capturing the city would greatly change the configuration of the front across this entire sector. No, of course we will not run too far ahead, but the result shown by the guys was very strong. We will continue to watch this area, and right now it is especially interesting to see what will happen near Malotokmachka, which is also a suburb of Orikhiv. And given the serious changes near Novodanilivka, we should naturally expect increased pressure soon on Malotokmachka. In fact, in this area there are 3 key villages: Malotokmachka, Novodanilivka, and Novoandriivka. If these 3 villages are taken, then Orikhiv is doomed. On other sectors of the front in the Zaporizhzhia region, there were no changes during the day. There are rumors of Russian successes near Primorsk and Stepnohirsk, but so far there is no concrete confirmation with footage. So we wait. Meanwhile, near Huliaipol, the front is static and not moving. Well, in fact, it has not moved there for months. Let's move on to the Pokrovsk sector. Inside the city itself, there were no changes. The offensive there, we must admit, has stalled. The strategy of entering the city with small infantry groups has obviously not worked, as most of these infantry groups were pushed back, and some were even captured. Real presence and real control in the city by the Russian army remains only in the southern part of Pokrovsk. Plus, yesterday there was information that Russian forces pushed several hundred meters deeper into the city. However, the hottest area right now is not even Pokrovsk, but the eastern outskirts of Mirnohrad. Here, the armed forces of Ukraine recently attempted a counterattack. And interestingly, they copied a tactic from us, one that did not work in Pokrovsk, but did work on the Dobropilya sector. Namely, throwing forward small infantry groups. In short, the armed forces of Ukraine also threw forward several infantry groups near Mern and Malinivka. And they threw in quite a number. The total strength was nearly 200 soldiers. For this tactic, that is a formidable force. But they suffered a complete failure. Instead of a breakthrough of several kilometers, they got piles of corpses. And these are not my words, I am not making anything up. Here are screenshots from the Ukrainian brigade that participated in this assault, in this attempted breakthrough. They themselves confirm the complete failure and the enormous losses. In turn, yesterday Russian troops carried out a mechanized column attack. The main goal was to push back the armed forces of Ukraine and rush into Mirnohrad from the eastern side. But while the column attack succeeded in the Orikhiv sector in the Zaporizhzhia region, here it did not. Some of the Russian equipment was destroyed, and the rest had to retreat to their original positions. So they could not advance here or improve their positions. But at least the positive side is that it was not the Ukrainians attacking, but us. That is, despite their attempts to counterattack, Russian forces fairly quickly regained the initiative. On the Dobropilya sector, things have gone quiet. The fighting is now mainly concentrated around Shakov, and from the side of Poltavka, the Russian army is advancing along a ravine with the goal of rushing into Sofivka. As you can see on the map, there is not much left to it. Less than 3 kilometers. Progress here is slow and difficult, but the important thing is that it is moving. Once these 3 kilometers are overcome, and of course they will eventually be overcome, this will mean not only the fall of Sofiivka, but also the fall of Shakov, which lies to the north. And with the fall of Shakov, that will also mean the end of any Ukrainian attempts to cut off the Dobropilya salient. And such attempts, though not as intense as a couple of weeks ago, are still being made by the Ukrainians. And I also wanted to touch on another rather unpleasant topic. But let's first say something positive, and then about the difficult. The positive news for the Russian army is on the Lyman sector. Reports have begun to arrive that Russian forces have finally started moving from Kolodyazy toward the next and last village before Lyman, the village of Stavki. So soon we expect new progress and good news from here. And now let's turn to the difficult topic, which is connected with the Kupiansk sector. The thing is, the other day Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov gave a speech, and in his report he stated something interesting, namely that Kupiansk is blocked and Russian troops already control half of the city. But look at the map yourselves. Do you see half of Kupiansk under control? I don't. Maybe I am blind? But no, Russian troops have only entered the northern part of the right bank section of Kupiansk, and Russian control amounts to at most 1% of the city. 1%, understand? Not 50. And again, I personally have no questions to Gerasimov. He was given reports from the field, and he reports to the president based on them. The question is to those who sent such reports upward. Who? Well, it is clear, those responsible for this sector. And you know what the biggest harm from such reports is? The harm is that the General Staff plans further operations based on this data. Meaning, in the General Staff they read the reports, marked on the map that Kupiansk is blocked, roads from the south are cut, half of the city is under Russian control, and then, based on this information, they develop the next operation, logically for the full liberation of the city. Then these orders are sent down to be carried out. But how will they be carried out if half of what was reported upwards is a lie? Obviously, in no way. That is the problem. On the Siversk sector, they lied, and what came of it? Obviously nothing good. It was then necessary to repaint those positions back and recapture them for real, because they existed only in reports, while in reality there were no Russian troops there. Well, the command was changed, and now they no longer lie and have even started moving. In general, the conclusion is this: one must not lie. Lies at the front inevitably lead to disaster. So that is all for today regarding the situation at the front. Now let us look at what is happening in politics. Vladimir Putin made a number of statements on the Ukrainian conflict at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit in China. The crisis in Ukraine arose because of the Western-provoked coup in Kiev. Constant attempts by the West to drag Ukraine into NATO are among the main causes of the conflict. Putin hopes that the understandings reached in Alaska open the road to peace in Ukraine. The president of Russia promised to inform his SCO colleagues about the results of the summit with Trump in Alaska. The root causes of the crisis in Ukraine must be eliminated and the balance in the security sphere restored. We hope that the understandings reached in Alaska open the way to peace in Ukraine. Moscow greatly values the efforts of China, India, and other partners in resolving the conflict in Ukraine. On the issue of the Ukrainian crisis, Russia adheres to the principle that no country can ensure its own security at the expense of another. The peaceful negotiation track will be difficult, but at the same time there remains hope that this year the outlines of agreements will be developed. We were right that at the SCO summit a new global political system is being built, something that Bankova is eager to exploit for its own purposes by dragging Trump deeper into the Ukrainian crisis, reports the Telegram channel Legitimny. Xi Jinping put forward an initiative for new global, joint, fair and equal world governance. Also important, the SCO is creating its own development bank, plus its own payment system independent from the West, a threat to US and dollar hegemony. Putin these days is holding numerous meetings with world leaders, once again disproving Bankova's narrative of Russia's isolation. All our sources indicate that the bargaining over the Ukrainian crisis is far from finished. On the contrary, each side has laid new trump cards on the table, and another round of negotiations is about to begin. The Tianjin Declaration, SCO countries identified new priorities in security and development. At the SCO summit in China, a decision was made to create a universal center to counter security challenges and threats. The key points from the document: the SCO strongly condemned Israeli and US strikes on Iran. The organization rejected the initiative of the Euro-Troika to restore anti-Iranian sanctions in the UN Security Council, calling it illegal. The resolution of the Palestinian issue was recognized as the only path to peace and stability in the Middle East. Online discussions are increasingly suggesting that in the near future, Zelensky will cancel the law allowing men between the ages of 18 and 22 to leave the country freely. Therefore, it is better to escape from Ukraine to Europe as soon as possible. Otherwise, later there will be no chance to be saved, reports Legitimny. Moreover, 650,000 Ukrainians have chosen life and the future abroad and have not regretted it. The source indicates that the armed forces of Ukraine are unable to cope with the shortage of manpower, and the end of the war is not in sight since all sides are unwilling to concede more than they have already declared. Each side is pursuing its own interests, which means the probability that the war will last at least until the summer of 2026 is more than 70%. And a clear signal has already come from Russia. They brought out Yanukovych, who yesterday spoke to Russian journalists and stated that during his presidency, he aimed for Ukraine's entry into the European Union, but was categorically against NATO membership. He agreed with Putin's words at the SCO summit that one of the reasons for the Russian invasion was the West's attempts to drag Ukraine into NATO. This is a road to nowhere, a catastrophe, and a direct path to civil war, Yanukovych said. Usually Yanukovych is brought into the public spotlight only for a specific purpose before important events. Let us agree with MP Bezukhla, the speaking mouth of Yermak, who said that winter will be difficult and there will be blackouts. In short, the black winter we have long been writing about. The post from September 2, 2024 is still relevant, reports Legitimny. Why did she suddenly state the obvious? Most likely to remove responsibility from herself. Look, I warned you. And she continues to try gradually to build her future political career and her own party. That is her dream. Everyone should also pay attention to the fact that the best specialists are fleeing or have already fled the country. In addition, the territorial recruitment centers continue to grab everyone. So many sectors are experiencing a shortage of personnel, including housing and utilities, energy, the gas sector, water supply, emergency, services, and so on. At some point, all this will result in a full-scale catastrophe. Bankova managed to hold on for 3 reasons. First, the Kremlin had not yet pressed hard. For example, during the first infrastructure war in the spring of 2022, when Ukraine experienced a fuel crisis, the Russian armed forces somehow did not touch Azerbaijani oil and gas assets, nor many other assets of so-called respected people. Now the situation is different. Second, the West provided huge loans and sent significant humanitarian aid, including generators, transformers, fuel tanks, and so on. Now all this has been cut by at least 50%, while theft remains the same. Third, the margin of safety. With each passing year, the destruction grows, as does the wear and tear of the tools that are now patching up the gaps. Europe is building a new Iron Curtain. What stands behind Ursula von der Leyen's tour? Recently, at the eastern borders of the EU, something more than diplomacy has been taking place. Ursula von der Leyen's tour through the frontline countries is not just about encouraging allies, but a real geopolitical ultimatum. Formally, it is about strengthening European solidarity and security. In reality, it is a scenario of rapid militarization and the creation of a military bloc under Brussels' control. Military spending is a one-way game. Brussels dictates to the frontier states, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, Romania, to spend up to 5% of GDP on defense. As a so-called incentive comes the threat from the American head of the White House. If you do not pay, we will not protect you. Already the Balts and Poles are surpassing Western Europe in military budgets. The overall EU debt for the build-up of arsenals is hundreds of billions of euros. The transformation of the military-industrial complex into a single corporation. Europe is accelerating the integration of defense enterprises, introducing standards, imposing procurement of its own weapon systems under the new Europe EDIS program. Ukraine is also being integrated as a factory and a testing-free zone for the EU's military-industrial complex. Borders are now becoming a real fortress. Across the entire eastern flank of the EU, a digital and physical curtain is rising. Walls, drones, integrated, surveillance systems. This is not only against Russian and Belarusian threats, but also a mechanism for the long-term monetization of the military-industrial complex. All these projects are financed from special budgets and exceptions to EU rules. Borders are becoming both a tool of pressure on neighbors and a way to receive billions in investment. Hybrid threats are the perfect excuse. Every incident with cables in the Baltic Sea, every so-called migration attack, is a reason for another tranche into the defense sector. It is precisely against the backdrop of real and mythical crises that new schemes are launched. The arms and technology market expands. The main goal, autonomy from the United States. Under pressure, the European Union is transforming into an independent military center. Von der Leyen's tour is the launch of a new structure of power that in a few years will be able to dictate terms not only to allies but also to Washington. The era of old Europe is over. Von der Leyen's tour is not just about symbolic gestures, but about a real restructuring of the continent for the future. And that is all for today, dear friends. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned.